So going into the Lord of Hatred expansion, mythic items are still incredibly rare, but incredibly sought after, with almost every build still using at least one mythic, a lot of them using multiple, and because they're still so rare, it's still pretty hard to get ones with good rolls, more specifically get mythics with greater affix rolls that can pretty massively increase their power, especially for hitting certain breakpoints like most builds are using Air of Perdition that has a good crit chance roll on it. Getting a greater affix on that crit chance roll could potentially allow you to not have crit chance at another piece that could potentially give you another multiplicative damage roll on that item instead. So being able to get your mythics and being able to get them well rolled is incredibly important, which begs the question, where can you efficiently go and farm mythic items that are pretty consistent to get and will allow you to just get more and more chances at mythic items? And I want to go over the 2 best ways in this expansion to get these mythic items. And the first way is going to be the main one you've probably heard of. There's just 1 or 2 pieces of this you probably don't know about, or something I don't hear a lot of people talking about. And this is going to be the Undercity with the mythic tributes, which is just the mythic tribute of armaments. And when you get one of these mythic tributes and you do that run in the Undercity, it has an incredibly high chance to give you at least 1 mythic. I'm not sure if it's guaranteed because I've done, I think, a couple dozen of these so far, and I've never not gotten a mythic. I have heard some people say they've done a run before and not gotten a mythic. So if it's not 100%, it's probably like 90+% to get at least 1 mythic from a mythic tribute run in the Undercity. And the main place you get these and the tributes of armaments is usually from world bosses, but a bunch of different content throughout the game can give you tributes of armaments, and there are all of the different rarities, so magic all the way up to the mythic ones. And if you don't know, you can put 5 of any tribute in the cube and upgrade it to the next tier. And what's unique with the armament tributes is that you could put 5 legendary and turn it into the mythic, which you can't do with any of the other tributes. And something you may have not realized is that if you go to the Undercity skill tree and go down the middle section, the final node is called Idols of War, which the ancestral tribute of armaments, which is the legendary one, can now drop throughout Sanctuary. So pretty much anything you do in the game that could drop you a key, any type of endgame key, can now also just give you one of these legendary tributes of armaments, which again, you turn 5 into a mythic tribute. So you definitely want to have this key when you're doing pretty much anything else in the game except running the Undercity. Now, if you have 6 points in the Undercity skill tree, you could keep your points all the way down into this node and still get the other things you need for when you're actually running the Undercity with your mythic tribute. So this is a very good way to get a lot more armament tributes, which will then build up into giving you a lot more mythic tributes. Also, make sure to keep an eye on when world bosses are spawning. World bosses can still just give you mythic tributes, and if they don't, they will almost always give you some amount of tributes of armaments, just the lower rarity ones. Also, if you're doing whispers, always pick up the caches that give you keys. Those are very good. Those can give you mythic tributes, and they can just give you normal tributes of armaments as well. But there is one specific node you need to be using when you're doing the actual Undercity runs, especially when you're doing your mythic runs. Now, this video is going to be a bit more focused on being a solo player. If you want to, you can do rotations when you get a mythic tribute. So you would join a group doing a rotation of it. Everybody would use a mythic tribute back to back to back. So you're essentially quadrupling the amount of mythics you could potentially be getting. Me personally, I've been playing most of this expansion completely solo. I haven't done like any rotations or anything yet. So you could still get a lot of mythics completely solo. Now, the node you're going to need is on the left side of the Undercity tree, the green nodes. It is the 3rd node in the tree. This is the main thing you need. This is really the only thing you care about when you're running mythic tributes. This is Gutter Filth. When you activate any beacon within the Undercity, there is a chance to summon a portal prankster. And that's really the main thing you care about with this key. So any of the beacons that you click on within the Undercity run now just have a decent chance to spawn a goblin or a portal prankster. When you defeat that portal prankster, it will spawn another chest at the end of the run that mimics the loot you're getting out of the main chest of the Undercity. So if you're doing a mythic tribute run, that main chest chest you open has close to 100% chance to give you a mythic. Those other chests from the goblins will also mimic that first chest. I have done runs where I've gotten 4 mythic items out of 1 mythic tribute run because we got lucky and got 3 goblins in that run. And all of those goblins were from these beacons. Now, when it also comes to goblins, when you're specifically doing mythic runs, unless you're very slow at doing the run and your build is maybe a bit weaker for the torment tier you're in, you want to explore the entirety of the 3 levels of the Undercity because there can just be normal portal pranksters spawned within there. So you want to make sure you explore pretty much the entirety of those maps. Now, you don't have to go in every nook and cranny because in a certain radius it will just show you the goblins on your minimap, but you want to explore everything and make sure to hit every beacon. Because also when going through the Undercity and hitting every single beacon, including that big beacon on floor 2, that one's also still considered a beacon, so it can spawn a portal prankster as well. When you're completing every single one of the beacons, you will have more than enough to get tier 4. You will get tier 4 way before you hit every beacon, but because they can all still spawn portal pranksters, hit every single beacon and explore the entirety of the maps. Pretty much all you're going to be doing for the Undercity to have the best chance to get more of these tributes and then how to use them most efficiently. Also, on a side note, I've gotten the only 2 mythic seals I've obtained so far from these mythic Undercity runs, and while these things are still incredibly rare, it does seem like they have a much better chance to drop from a mythic tribute than pretty much all other content in the game. So also keep that in mind. You really want to be min-maxing these runs. So whether you're a solo player or doing rotation runs with your mythic tributes, this is everything you're going to need to know of how to do them the most efficient way possible. And the second method is going to be the much more consistently farmable method, and that's going to be layer bosses. But there's probably a few things you haven't been doing that can break this method for you a little bit, and some things that can also just give you more loot out of this. And depending on what keys you're currently using, you'll have a higher chance to get mythic items. So you have the initiate layer bosses, which all take the same first tier of keys, which are things like Uravar or Lord's Ear or Grigori. Then you have the greater layer bosses, which takes the higher tier of key, which is stuff like Duriel or Endariel. And then you also have a Belial at the end of this, which obviously takes his husks, which are much less farmable. But going through those tiers, it will give you a higher and higher chance to give you mythics. So initiate have the lowest chance, even though they're still pretty decent over time to get mythics. The greater layer bosses have a higher chance, and Belial seems to still have the highest out of the layer bosses. But again, you can't farm Belial near as much as any of the other bosses. Now that's just at a baseline, but once you go into the layer boss skill tree, you can start to get a lot of additional chances at mythics, some of which are just incredibly juiced. And the best place to go is the middle section of the tree when you're actually farming these bosses, because this is where you can start getting nemesis portals where the real juice loot comes in. So going down the middle tree, you have 2x2, which after you open up the horde chest, so the thing you use your key on at the end of the boss, it can just spawn this red portal that takes you into a nemesis layer. Now the first portal you get will be for the initiate layer bosses, so it'll be a initiate nemesis layer. Now when you go into this, it will have the boss you were facing, and then it'll have another random initiate boss within there as well. So let's say you're facing Grigori and you get the nemesis portal. When you go into it, it'll have Grigori and some other boss in there. When you defeat both of them, it will give you a massive amount of loot. Now the loot from the nemesis layer is not just like getting boss loot from say going and defeating Grigori and defeating another layer boss. It is a lot more than 2 bosses combined. And it's quite a high chance to get mythic items. In fact, just doing this first nemesis layer boss, I've gotten I think up to 3 mythics in one of these nemesis layers before. So they give you a ridiculous amount of loot. They give you a pretty good chance to get mythic items. Now, as you keep going through the layer boss tree, you can get better nemesis layers. So the second node below that is greater nemesis. So after you defeat the first nemesis layer, you now have a chance to get a greater nemesis layer. Now the greater nemesis layer will be basically the exact same thing as the initial nemesis layer. It'll just have greater layer bosses. So it could be like Duriel and Endariel, and this will yield even better loot than the initiate nemesis layer is. Now, how the chances of this works out is that it is the lowest chance to get the initial nemesis layer from facing any boss. And also keep in mind, if you are facing say one of the greater layer bosses, and you open up their horde and it gives you a nemesis layer, you won't go into a greater nemesis layer. No matter what boss you're facing, if the nemesis layer spawns, it will always be the initiate layer boss first. Then after you complete that initiate nemesis layer, it then has a chance to spawn the greater nemesis layer there. Now, to get the greater nemesis layer is a much higher chance than getting that initial nemesis layer. The initial nemesis layer is the lowest chance. It's a bit higher chance to get a greater nemesis layer. And then if you put the final point into this row, you can get ultimate nemesis layers. Now, when you have all 3 points, if you get a greater nemesis layer and defeat it, you will always get an ultimate nemesis layer at the end of that. So it's a low chance to get the initial nemesis layer. It's a bit higher chance to get a greater nemesis layer out of that. And it's a 100% chance to get an ultimate nemesis layer from the greater nemesis layer. A bit confusing, but it makes much more sense when you go through it. Now, the ultimate nemesis layer is a bit unique. So it says, after defeating all bosses within the greater nemesis layer, the Call of Evil will appear. This altar will accept 5 Betrayer's Husks and open a portal that takes you to the ultimate nemesis layer. So once you have all 3 of these points, you never want to go below 5 Betrayer's Husks, which are the things you need to summon Belial. Never go below 5 because you can always just get lucky and get this. Now, the ultimate nemesis layer is a bit different. You are facing Azmodan as the first boss, then he will also summon Andariel and Duriel. That is that boss fight. And once you've defeated all of them, you will get a massive loot explosion. Now, it says it's 10 horde chests worth of items. I don't really think this is true. I think this is just them trying to give you a general idea. It is a very, very high chance to get at least 1 mythic from this, and I think it's a much, much higher chance than just opening 10 horde chests. The amount of loot you get out of this final layer is absolutely insane. Also, keep in mind that one of the reasons for that is because the ultimate nemesis layer adds 5+ monster power to these bosses, which just increases loot of everything. So getting that ultimate nemesis layer gives you a ridiculous amount of loot, but you will also just be getting a ridiculous amount of loot because that means you'll have to have gone through 2 other nemesis layers. So you have a incredibly low chance to not get a mythic if you go through all 3 of these portals. And realistically, this just comes down to having these points in the tree and just farming bosses. So you go choose whatever boss you want to farm that drops an item you're looking for, and you just constantly farm them until you get a nemesis layer, and you go do that. All of that will be giving you a decent chance to get mythic items. Now, there are some additional nodes when you get more points in the layer boss skill tree that can also give you some good boosts. So on the left side of the skill tree, you could take first Layer of Runes, which layer bosses have +1 monster power, and layer bosses have a higher chance of dropping specific runes. I think every layer boss has like a set amount of runes that they drop more often. Now, the main reason you're actually taking this is because of the +1 monster power. +1 monster power makes the bosses harder, but it makes them drop better loot, so they're more rewarding. That's the main reason you're taking this. And then the second node below that is called Layer of Plenty. Now, the main reason you were taking this is again +1 in monster power. Now, the second thing this node does is gain a +1 horde chest when you slay a layer boss. So when you slay a layer boss, there will be 2 chests there, so you can use 2 keys to open 2 chests. So it's not giving you any free loot. It's essentially just a speed increase for how much time you'd have to spend on these bosses. I would recommend not opening up this second chest. It also does have a tooltip that tells you which one is which. The second chest does not seem to be able to spawn nemesis layers or Belials. The second chest just seems to be some extra thing that doesn't work like the first chest. That second chest will still give you the same loot, but again, I have done probably like 100 boss kills with this, and I don't think that second chest can spawn any Belials or nemesis portals. So for that reason, I would still recommend using Layer of Plenty if you have the amount of points you need in the skill tree, but don't open that second chest, just skip it, because you are essentially getting much less potential for every single key when doing this. Now, if you're really just looking for like a specific unique from a boss and you want to spend the least amount of time possible, you can then start opening those chests, but you're just getting less per key. Also, a pretty big disclaimer and something you're always going to want to be doing is anytime you get a nemesis layer, always restart your game. So log out and go to the main menu before going back and doing bosses, because you can get what's essentially a bug. It'll just reopen a nemesis layer on the next boss you kill, and it'll take you to the same nemesis layer with no bosses in it because it's the one you already defeated. This has happened to me a handful of times. I don't think it always happens, but there is the chance that that happens. So anytime you get a Nemesis lair, make sure to relog. So once you get into the Nemesis lair, defeat the bosses, loot your loot, make sure it's not spawning the next Nemesis lair up the chain. Once all of that's done, relog, log back in after you've looted and everything. This is just a precaution because I have had it multiple times where I would go in and defeat the Nemesis lair bosses, I would leave out of there, start boss farming again, it would spawn another Nemesis lair portal, and it would just take me to an empty Nemesis lair. So make sure to relog after every single one. And also make sure to subscribe because I will be doing a future video on a very good method to consistently farm lair boss keys. I'm not going to be going over methods of how to do that in this video because pretty much anything you do in the game could give you lair boss keys, usually the first tier of lair boss key, and then you go defeat the first tiers of lair bosses and they will give you the greater lair boss keys. But pretty much everything in the game will give you these, so you just build them up over time. But that future video will give you a method that's a bit more consistent once you've progressed far enough into the end game because there is a bit of setup for that method. These are absolutely the best ways to farm mythic items. You'll also notice that I didn't talk about Mephisto. Doing the Mephisto boss fight is not only incredibly limited in how much keys you could do, but for how difficult the fight is, the loot seems kind of trash. Honestly, the initiate Nemesis portals usually give me better loot than going and defeating Mephisto. So Mephisto is something I really wouldn't spend my time on when you can just do either of these methods, which will give you the highest and most consistent ways of farming mythic items. But that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.